Charles Manson convinced his followers to murder 9 people in an attempt to incite a race war. Shoko Asahara ordered his followers to release sarin gas in a Tokyo subway, killing 13 people. Marshal Applewhite of Heaven's Gate convinced his followers to castrate and kill themselves in the belief that it would help them to ascend to a higher plane. Jim Jones convinced more than 900 of his followers to kill themselves. All this was done by using influence and control techniques. And then you have this from the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Well, the events of the past 2 years have been historic, and they truly have been unprecedented. They indicate that we are close to the outbreak of the Great Tribulation. How vital it is, brothers, that we continue to recognize Jehovah's channel for receiving spiritual food. The November 15th, 2013 issue of the Watchtower mentioned key points for elders in particular to keep in mind as we prepare to face the attack of that coalition of nations that the Bible calls Gog of Magog. Now, I'm going to quote the article. This is what it stated. This is quote. At that time, life-saving direction that we receive from Jehovah's organization may not appear practical from a human standpoint. All of us must be ready to obey any instructions we may receive, whether these appear sound from a strategic or human standpoint or not. Now is the time for any who may be putting their trust in secular education, material things, or human institutions to adjust their thinking.
Fear and manipulation and control are all wrapped up in that clip. Listen to us even though it might not seem logical or it might not seem right by human and societal norms. Just obey the governing body without question. Those utterances in that clip are just downright dangerous. And that is because the Watchtower has a history of flip-flopping with regard to some of their doctrine. For instance, vaccinations were originally acceptable. 1921, from a series of articles were presented in the Golden Age describing vaccinations as against God's everlasting covenant. However, that changed in 1952. After 30 years, the Watchtower Society returned to its original position, once again allowing vaccinations, according to the Watchtower of December 15th, 1952. Organ transplants were originally described as wonderful and useful, according to the Awake magazine. But in 1967, transplants forbidden to witnesses as cannibalism, this continued to be the case through the 1970s. In 1980, the Watchtower Society overturned that decision and transplants became acceptable once again. And then, of course, there's the blood transfusion issue. Originally allowed, blood transfusions and donating blood for transfusion is commended in the Golden Age, in the early years, in the 1940s. 1945, forbidden blood transfusions was first stated as wrong. 1961, it became a disfellowshipping offense, according to the Watchtower. In 1961, it was clearly specified that blood laws applies to both whole blood and components of blood, such as blood fractions and hemoglobin and so forth. Stated, if you have reason to believe that a certain product contains blood or blood fraction, if the label says that certain tablets contain hemoglobin, this is from blood. A Christian knows without asking that he should avoid such preparation. That's according to the Watchtower. And then gradually becoming allowed again, 1992, blood components were listed with some minor components being allowed. Major components and hemodilution, of course, forbidden, according to the Watchtower in 1982. 1985, there was a change saying that some fractions are now acceptable, despite being briefly stored outside the blood. 2000, major change to blood policy, with all of blood now being allowed when converted to minor fractions. Lives were lost following laws on blood, vaccinations, and organ transplants that were later superseded. Others are still in disfellowship state for transfusing blood components that are now considered acceptable. The effect that shunning non-compliant members has on lives is dramatic. The deaths that have resulted from compliant members as the ultimate sacrifice in this regard shows us that the Watchtower is blood guilty. Lives were lost following laws on blood, vaccinations, and organ transplants that were later superseded. Others are still in a disfellowship state for transfusing blood components that are now considered acceptable. The effect that shunning non-compliant members has on lives is dramatic. The deaths that have resulted to compliant members are the ultimate sacrifice for an organization. In this regard, the Watchtower Society has blood guilt on its hands. A quote from Terry Pratchett's Small Gods perfectly concludes this discussion on listening to cult leaders. It says, "I think you should do things because they're right, not because gods say so. They might say something different another time." Until next time, bye for now.